Thanks. Hi, everyone. So my lightning talk is really about a project that I'm working on. But before I start that, I just want to briefly say that I'm from Tetra Tech International Development. So if you've not heard of that, that is a development consultancy. And my background is in peace building, conflict sensitivity development, and evaluation and research. And I'm based in the European office in London. So thanks. So today I'm going to talk about the Somalia Monitoring Program and some donor analysis work that we did through them. I'll refer to this as SMP3. And essentially, SMP3 is a program that runs alongside the UK's development portfolio in Somalia and Somaliland. And essentially, it provides technical support to the UK government and to its implementing partners and other donors around monitoring and verifications, learning and change, rapid research. This can be geographical, thematic. We provide some M&E technical assistance and knowledge management. And what we do really is about trying to help with either program design in Somalia or Somaliland or program adaptation. You can see the sort of focal areas of the British Embassy in Mogadishu, and they do, as well as traditional development, they also do security and justice, which their peace-building portfolio folds under that particular point. As part of one of the pieces of work that we did, essentially, is that we have been asked to do a bit of analysis. So let me back up. There is a Somalia donor working group, and essentially, they need to report to the Somali government a certain amount of information in terms of their budgets, their spend, under what themes it is, geographic locations, and who's doing it. The Somalia government has four development pillars that they call the National Development Plan, and so donors report on this. But the donors themselves hadn't actually really done any sort of analysis themselves about this. So in the last year, obviously, there's been some geographical change, obviously with the absence of US aid and some reduction of ODA. The donors have really now put some thought into, okay, what we want to do is we actually want to have better coordination and better coherence in terms of our programming. So what they asked us to do is to analyze the data to understand who was implementing where, under what themes, and things like that. So under that analysis, the scope was really about 16 donors working across Somalia and Somaliland. And so we did that analysis across their budgets and themes. We did not verify that, and it's about budgets, not actual spend. So we carried out this analysis, and we were able to go down to the state and regional levels. District level was also a requirement, but most of the columns of the information on district level was actually absent. And then the last thing that we did is we overlaid that with what we call CRAM risk data. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but we overlaid that to see where it was being implemented if that was affected by any sort of risk. And then we presented this as part of a visual dashboard. So we have a dashboard because people love dashboards. And so we created a dashboard for the donors so that they could see this visually, but also they could generate their own reports if they wanted. Just quickly on limitations, again, some of this was apples and oranges. So the African Development Bank is government to government directly, whereas there is some bilateral funding of consultancies and NGOs, so we're making some sense of that. And as I said before, data was missing, particularly at the district level, so 72.6% of the data was missing at the district level. And again, there was some repetition and overlap in the sort of thematic NDB pillars. So for example, when we start going through the data, it would say that they were operating in a particular region and that the themes would be health, education, and peace, but not a real financial breakdown or clarity of exactly how much is going to what. So again, just to say that there are four pillars essentially for the Somalia NDP program, the National Development Plan. And essentially they're transformational governance, security and rule of law, sustainable economic development, social and human capital transformation. And these are quite broad. Again, peace building and conflict prevention usually goes in the security and rule of law category or pillar. So what we found was essentially that basically about 54% of the donor portfolio goes into just two pillars, and that would be social transformation and economic development. So there's a big bias there in terms of where they're putting their money. Some of this other information is sort of sub-themes to these national development pillars. Now, what you can see here is that basically across the states, most of the funding is actually pretty even spend, which is interesting. And apart from where it sort of drops off slightly at Bendir, and Somaliland is treated essentially as its own funding stream. But pretty much across the portfolio, they're spending about the same levels everywhere. So I mentioned before that we also overlaid this with some CRAM risk data, and we put together this sort of composite. So essentially what we looked at as we looked at conflict, we looked at incidents of violence, we looked at social risk, political risk, economic risk, and environmental risk. And we put that overlay into this sort of composite. So you can say Lower Shabelle has a highest risk score across Somalia, and Nugal has the lowest. But when you look at the column on the right, the spending is it's pretty much the same in terms of that. So you can see that actually, at least looking from the risk, it doesn't seem to have that. So we drilled down into that, and you can see here that funding is not proportional to risk by region. And we've went even farther to sort of say, okay, well, if Lower Shabelle has got the highest risk score, but lower funding than other places, why exactly is that? And then finally, we looked at, again, budgeting by donors. So obviously, you've got here by the amounts of money, and then the farther you go out to the right is the higher the risk. And of course, the spheres are bigger based on actual budgets. And you can see here that most donors fund in low to medium risk areas across Somalia. So we asked them, do you know why this is? Is it because there's weak governance? Is it because you're afraid about aid diversion? Are you doing that analysis? Are you thinking about these kinds of things? So really, we found out that there's no region that has a single donor. World Bank and KfW have the widest spread, where World Bank and KfW both are in all sort of 10 regions. On average, 7 donors operate in each region. And I think one of the things that we've put back to them is, if you are talking about better coordination and better coherence, would it be useful to do a pilot? So to actually look into maybe Galgaduud and look at who's implementing what, and then see if this is something worth investigating around coordination. We also said that, again, because funding is allocated primarily to 2 NDB pillars, could some donors have flexibility and be able to pivot to cover the other 2 pillars? I don't think anybody was really asking themselves why most of the money is going into 2 pillars and not really going to the other 2. And again, as I said, there's a weak correlation between budget allocation and risk. And again, donors hadn't really explored that themselves, so they didn't really have an answer for that. I've just put this illustration, and I'm not proposing this is the way it is, but we were wondering if there was some sort of risk-based regional fund allocation or some way that they could actually sort of think ahead and probably work out how they're going to spend and how they could work it out. And that's kind of it. We've sort of started on a journey with them now, where now that we've done this analysis and we've sort of given it back to them, we're hoping to continue working with them on a process of either perhaps piloting, doing further mapping. We're also going to try to push them to get this sort of district level information, because I think that'll be quite interesting and useful. I think also we're looking at other layers of analysis that we can apply over this rather than just the CRAM data as well. So that's it. Thanks, everyone. And if you have any questions, please follow up with me afterwards. Thanks.